Blog theory. Feedback and capture in the circuits of Drive-Polity. By Jodi Dean. 2010. Chapter 2. The Death of Blogging. Section 1. A sure sign of the triumph of a practice or idea is the declaration of its death. Early in the summer of 2007, the bell tolled for blogging, despite the fact that the number of blogs had exceeded 70 million and was continuing to rise. Throughout the ostensibly dead blogosphere, word spread rapidly that blogs had been killed by boredom, success, and even newer media, a weird contradiction whereby the content of the news was belied by the form of its blogged announcement. For some, the newness had worn off. Having blogged, they were ready for something else. Some blog writers tired of the demands of the format for regular updates, they said what they had to say and moved on. Some blog readers lost interest in the daily activities of so-called A-listers. Familiar with the voices and perspectives of widely popular long-term bloggers, they began turning their attention elsewhere, to making videos for YouTube or lolcats for Icon Has Cheeseburger. Others lamented the repetitiveness of blog debates. After a few months of reading a given blog or frequenting a set of sites in the bloggerpelago, predicting the range of responses to any given post or comment was easy. In the words of a blogger quoted in an Australian newspaper, the same old people saying the same old things. Boring, boring, boring. Wasn't the increasing number of abandoned blogs, of ghost blogs with one or two posts left behind by those who tried blogging and then realized they had better ways to spend their time, clear evidence that blogging was dying as a practice? No. Accompanying the apparently rising rates of blog death was a phenomenon indicative of blogging's vitality, even as it was a culpable suspect in the death of blogging, the rise of corporate blogs. Well before the summer of 2007, blogs seemed to have reached a saturation point. Corporations had begun to monitor, intervene in, and attempt to produce conversations. As the Brand Republic website urged, by getting involved in user-generated content, you can get more people involved in your brand than they have ever been before, increase their loyalty, even make them your brand advocates. And you can find out exactly what they think about your product. Blogs provided access to information about customers' likes and dislikes, trends and buzz previously available only in the survey snapshots of pollsters. By starting their own blogs, hiring bloggers, and participating in discussions related to their products, companies could market in another mode. They could tap niches and build brand awareness through more direct interactions with potential customers, even as they faced the problem of attracting readers to their blogs, of promoting their promotions, or advertising their advertising. By 2009, 70% of bloggers said they blogged about brands. With brand attachment as a primary goal, corporate blogging came up against a key element of blogging, the conceit of authenticity. How could a blog ostensibly written by a logo or branded media image or even an actual person paid to blog by the company offer anything but spin? What would be the attraction of a blog that was all advertising? Why would anyone visit that? In 2006, for example, bloggers outed McDonald's for foisting a fake blog on unsuspecting viewers in ads for the Super Bowl. Even worse were the computer-generated spam blogs or splogs. Spam blogs scrape and grab content from anywhere on the internet and dump it on a blog that has been automatically generated. This content then shows up higher in search engine results since it appears that more people are linking to it. When one searches the content and follows the link, one ends up at site with a bunch of ads and thus contributes to the site owner's ad revenue. In December 2006, splogs were being created at the rate of about 11,000 a day. Combined with the generally recognized banality of most blogs, the proliferation of blog trash suggested a technology and a practice that had exceeded its use-by date. As blogging apparently suffocated under the excesses of its own success, new applications appeared to take its place or, better, join it in an ever-intensifying expansion of media applications and practices. Some commentators viewed these new applications as more nails in blogging's coffin. Blogging was good while it lasted, but it was no longer fresh. It wasn't politically bold or culturally innovative, but rather the way one's aunt displayed her cat photos. New applications seemed to be changing the conditions of possibility for blogging. With the addition of podcasting, photoblogging, and video blogging, the platform had been stretched as far as it could go. The most frequently invoked blog killers were large social networking sites like Facebook and MySpace, but microblogging practices like Twitter, a merging of SMS-short message service or texting, and the Internet created in 2006, were not far behind. Facebook and MySpace reconfigure the link, post, comment, and archive structure associated with blogs. Rather than oriented around daily or even weekly posts on a regular set of themes or from a particular perspective, these large social network sites rely on brief, frequent updates to user profiles, lots of photos, and ever-growing lists of friends. Blog updates can be syndicated into one's profile and links can be shared with one's friends, but unlike blogs' reliance on the persona of the blogger, social network sites prioritize connections to others, whoever and whatever the others might be. Bands, groups, and products are all available as potential friends on MySpace. Contacts matter more than information, angle, or opinion. Social network sites let one see one's connections, the others who are more than an audience of readers, the colleagues and family members and friends of friends that constitute the communities that traverse specific locations. Able quickly and easily to update one's friends on what one is doing, one doesn't have to spend a great deal of time involved with specific, individual, people. It's like friendship light or friendship without friendship. In other words, it's in the overall series of objects or practices deprived of their harmful features that Slavoj Žižek associates with contemporary culture: beer without alcohol, sugar-free candy, coffee without caffeine, etc. Even better, social network sites let us see ourselves being seen. Instead of writing for strangers, a characteristic of blogs insofar as they are available to search engines, social network sites privilege sharing with friends, with a circuit of others that one has explicitly friended. Like Facebook and MySpace, Twitter also relies on social networks and short entries. Mobile users text entries, tweets, of 140 characters or fewer as they go about their days, updating their followers on where they are, what they are doing, and what they think or feel at any given moment. It's like blogging stripped to its most banal, repetitive, and nonetheless connective and intimate features. A benefit over blogs is brevity, one can keep up without having to spend much time doing it, and mobility, one can post and receive updates via mobile phone so one can always be connected. More significant is the performance of authenticity enabled by Twitter, along with Facebook's newsfeed and the mood updates on MySpace. The short glimpses into someone's life as it is being lived seem real. They seem real in part because they are only glimpses, fragments, and indications rather than fully formed and composed reflections, and in part because we witness them being seen by others. Obscuring the larger setting of communicative capitalism, the declaration that blogs are dead hinders our thinking about contemporary media practices and their additive, supplementary, interlinking dimensions. Social network sites and Twitter don't replace blogs, they traverse, extend, and include them. According to the 2009 State of the Blogosphere report, 73% of bloggers v. 14% of the general population use Twitter. The percentage used among professional bloggers is even higher. All bloggers say their number one use of Twitter is promoting their blogs. Ignoring the intermediation of contemporary communicative practices, the proclamation that blogs are dead repeats the criticisms of blogging that accompanied its emergence. Blogging is parasitic, narcissistic, pointless. Since these criticisms neither prevented the rapid uptake of blogging nor actually cohere insofar as the accusations of parasitism and narcissism presume a point to blogging, even as they wrongly reduce blogs to either commentaries on other media or accounts of people's everyday experiences, they are better understood as descriptions. Blogging is parasitic, narcissistic, and pointless, and this is why Internet users all over the world blog in ever-increasing numbers. The evidence offered for the death of blogs points to blogging's life even as it indexes ongoing turbulence, innovation and obsolescence in media practices. As one blogger noted. Quotation by Anonymous. Hardly a day goes by without some intellectual or journalist or other member of the Only Our Opinion Counts brigade writing something about how awful, stupid, passé, dumb, rude, uninteresting or otherwise unacceptable blogs are. My unwanted advice to such writers is that if blogs really are as uncaptivating as you keep saying, and are as rapidly on their way to oblivion as you keep breathlessly announcing, then stop writing about them. End of quotation. Critical media theory easily risks the same mistake, proceeding as if networked media practices necessarily contain or accompany a guerrilla politics of minoritarian disruption, hacktivism, rather than emerge and persist as components of a vast commercial entertainment culture that has found a way to get the users to make the products they enjoy and even pay to do it. Just as the newness wore off for some English-language early adopters, millions more across the globe were taking up blogging. Some of the most significant growth is in Asia. Over 61% of Chinese internet users have created blogs, compared to 18% in the UK, 21% in the US, and 8% in Germany, and over 80% of internet users in China, South Korea, and Malaysia have read blogs. In 2006 there were more blog posts per hour in Japanese than there were in English. That there was no longer an A-list of elite bloggers, nearly always centered in and on the US, didn't mean blogging was dead. It meant that more people were blogging, that there were more blogs to read, and that the blogipelago was growing, expanding, diversifying. It meant, in other words, that blogging had become an active component of contemporary media's circuits. To accentuate the diversity among blogs, the way that bloggers do not constitute some kind of natural group, understand themselves as a collective, or interact in a common space, not least because of differences in language, culture, location, and interest, I favor the term blogipelago over the more common blogosphere. The term sphere suggests a space accessible to any and all. It implies a kind of conversational unity, as if bloggers addressed the same topics and participated in one giant discussion. The term blogosphere tricks us into thinking community when we should be asking about the kinds of links, networks, flows, and solidarities that blogs hinder and encourage. Blogipelago, like archipelago, reminds us of separateness, disconnection, and the immense effort it can take to move from one island or network to another. It incites us to attend to the variety of uses, engagements, performances, and intensities blogging contributes and circulates. Corporate uptake of blogging, while a nuisance to long-time bloggers, is a market version of the expansion and diversification of blogs. While apparent in companies' enthusiasm for identifying ever more specific niche tastes and markets, the drive to monetize work and content seemingly offered free of charge accelerates blogging's centripetal momentum. Far from inaugurating a new creative, post-monetary commons, media practices like blogging and social networks seize the paths of neoliberal capitalism. Why should employers pay for work that we happily do for free? Blogging lives. Rather than the lingering remainders of a cultish enthusiasm for self-expression that is rapidly wearing off, the new technological forms and practices emerging around and from blogging indicate the spread and morphing of drives to connect and express. My concern here is to theorize critically the wider spread uptake of blogging as a practice that emerges in a rapidly changing communications environment. Blogging is a way to access the current conjuncture of media, subjectivity, and politics, a conjuncture that I argue is best understood via the reflexive circuit of drive. Section 2. Blogging has been associated with murder and death ever since the mainstream media started noticing it, around 2002. Just like video killed the radio star, film killed vaudeville, and television killed bowling leagues, so did blogs allegedly kill journalism and mainstream media, replacing these with idiots and amateurs who failed to check their facts and ranted about their pet issues, as well as issues with their pets. There's a constant underlying all this killing, corporate power. Even as some media forms eclipse others, global conglomerates profit from the innovations while pernicious arrangements of state power benefit from a diverted populace. Television can't deliver the requisite eyeballs? No problem. Switch gears, locate other sites to capitalize. The dominance of capitalism as a system requires changes in industry. Innovation drives capitalism. State forms adapt as well. Disintegrated spectacles allow for ever more advanced forms of monitoring, tracking, and surveillance. People plead for more cameras to keep them safe as they shop and happily relinquish personal data in exchange for saving a few cents here or there, for shaving seconds off this site or that. The opposition of the death of the old and vitality of the new, as well as the concomitant cries to condemn the old ways and celebrate the new, is a recurrent theme in technology and media writing that tells us nothing about the technologies and media practices involved. Inserting new actors into old series, the opposition between old and new obscures the practices and settings of technologies, the ways technologies are used, ways that are often diverse, conflicting, and unexpected, and the ways these users produce different sorts of subjects. For example, in the 1970s, access to a knowledge of computing put one in an elite class of scientists and engineers. By the end of the 1980s, computer literacy was considered a core skill or competence. In the 21st century, spending time online is suspected to be as much of a time waster as watching television. Blogging's obituary, though, is not just premature. It's not just an error. Rather, it alerts us to a change in a practice, a change that appears as an effect of our looking back. When bloggers are killers ushering in fundamental changes in media, politics, and journalism, they are understood within a logic of desire. That is, there is an underlying supposition that at some point in time some people wanted blogs, that blogs were objects of desire produced to fill a previous lack. For example, people didn't trust the mainstream media, so they started blogging in order to produce a journalism they could trust. The shift to death rhetoric marks a move away from this economy of desire and toward one of drive. When blogs are situated in a logic of drive, they aren't something we want but lack, aren't something introduced into a lack that they can't fill. They are objects difficult to avoid, elements of an inescapable circuit in which we are caught, compelled, driven. In Lacanian psychoanalysis, desire and drive each designate a way that the subject relates to enjoyment. Desire is always a desire to desire, a desire that can never be filled, a desire for a jouissance that can never be attained. In contrast, drive attains jouissance in the repetitive process of not reaching it. Failure, or the thwarting of the aim, provides its own sort of success. If desire is like the path of an arrow, drive is like the course of the boomerang. What is fundamental at the level of the drive, Lacan teaches, is the movement outwards and back in which it is structured. Through this repetitive movement outward and back, the subject can miss its object but still achieve its aim. The subject can find satisfaction in the very circular movement of repeatedly missing its object. Because failure produces enjoyment, because the subject enjoys via repetition, drive captures the subject. Slavoj Žižek writes, drive is something in which the subject is caught, a kind of acephalous force which persists in its repetitive movement. The subject gets stuck doing the same thing over and over again because this doing produces enjoyment. Post, 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 click, click, click. Although Freud's thinking about drive changed over the course of his research, his view is typically rendered in terms of two drives, eros and thanatos, life and death, connection and separation. Lacan rejects this dichotomy, arguing that drive as such is death drive. Rather than involving some kind of primary homeostasis or equilibrium, drives are a destabilizing force, a force that persists, that exerts a pressure, without regard for the pleasure and well-being of the subject. As a persistence that is not for the sake of the subject, drive, then, has almost an undead quality. It is excessive, persisting beyond the ostensibly natural contours of life and death. In the Lacanian view, drive as death drive encompasses the way that even a drive for life results in paradoxes wherein saving life entails sacrificing it, pursuing life leads to risking it, and cherishing life looks like a bizarre fixation on morbidity. Turning back in on itself, turning into its opposite, the death drive is reflexive. Section 3. Blogs emerge out of the Internet environment of the late 1990s, but not, as Gert Loving points out, as the result of a movement or event. They are more like a special effect of software. Blogs are retroactive effects of networked practices of storing and linking. In the words of the Digital Methods Initiative, they are natively digital and in this way akin to threads, tags, links, and search engines. They've also spawned their own natively digital offspring, most specifically the post as the primary unit designating a contribution, as opposed to the page, a key unit for print culture that makes little sense in a digital environment. Blogging's kinship with search engines is particularly close. The first blogs were responding to the same problems that led to the development of search engines. How can one find something in particular on the internet? Already in the late 90s, the internet was imbued with a fantasy of abundance. Anything was possible. One could connect to anyone, say anything, find everything. The truth was out there. Locating something specific, though, was another question altogether. There seemed to be too much noise, too much chaos. Finding useful, not to mention reliable, information was a challenge. The first blogs, 23 counted in 1999, were logs of websites, Signposts left by a previous navigator to those who might want to follow his path, trace her links. The compiler of the list, or blogger, presented links to sites or articles she found particularly noteworthy. What made the list most helpful was the blogger's commentary, the description of the site or explanation as to why a given link was included. Commentary was the value added, the new content that made the blog itself worth visiting. The commentary let blog readers, those looking for reliable guides as they made their way through the web, know whether they could trust the blogger. One shouldn't forget, though, that the first blogs were only first later, after bloggers were blogging. Blogs and search engines emerged in the place of a missing subject supposed to know, a concept from Lacanian psychoanalysis. Early searchers trying to make their way through the noise to find what they were looking for had to presuppose not only that what they wanted was out there, a promise of abundance, but that they could find it, a promise of access. Given the way abundance, everything was out there, made searching infinitely time-consuming. One needed help: signposts, indexes, catalogs, portals, editors, search engines. Before Google there were multiple projects and paths attempting to provide this help. Blogs and search engines are two such projects, two fillings in of the place that emerged for a subject supposed to know. What was the subject supposed to know? Supposed to know not just how to find information, but the truth of the searcher's desire. That is to say, those searching on the internet might not know what they actually want. They might call it one thing, but mean another. They might not know what they mean, not be able to put their desire into words. Search engines and blogs were established to occupy a place for the knower of our secrets, our desires, a place for one who would know what we wanted when we didn't really know ourselves. This supposition of a subject supposed to know is manifest in several different ways. One is hysterical. Faced with poor returns from a search query, the searcher responds with frustration, "No. That's not it. There must be something else, something more, something better." Another response is paranoid. There must be something or someone behind the scenes, collecting the data, distorting the results. Someone is watching, collecting. Someone or something is looking for me. The paranoid response, then, exposes attention. One wants knowledge to be available, but one doesn't want to be known. One's expectations are structured through a fantasy of abundance. The truth is out there, while at the same time one wants to withhold an aspect of oneself. The whole truth is not out there. My truth, the truth of my desire, remains withheld. There is even a perverse response that, again, demonstrates the underlying supposition of a subject supposed to know. The pervert positions himself as the instrument or guarantor of knowledge, the one who can deal with contingency, who can build a better search engine, come up with a completely reliable algorithm, serve as the vehicle for realizing the fantasy of abundance. Blogs and search engines are different approaches to the same problem, different occupations of the same place. They point, though, in different directions. Faced with the challenge of providing a trusted guide through a chaotic, indeterminable, changing field, search engines say trust the algorithm. In contrast, blogs say, trust doesn't scale. So while the former offers a reliability based in equations and crawl capacities, the latter says, know the knower. It focuses on the person providing the link, offering the searcher the opportunity to know this person and so determine whether she can be trusted. Social network sites refract the problem of trust yet again. If the issue with blogs is the credibility of the guide or writer, the issue for social network sites is trust in the audience, in the others who might be following me. Of course, this description is too simple. Like search engines, blogs are a technological application. For many commentators, the capabilities enabled by this application establish the definition of a blog, a collection of posts, each with its own permalink, appearing in reverse chronological order, time-stamped, and archived. Posts can be texts, images, audio, and video. They may feature links to other blogs and sites on the Internet. They may offer visitors opportunities to comment. In her brief 2002 introduction to blogs, Meg Hourihan observes how newness attaches readers to blogs. Because the newest posts appear first, readers can easily keep up to the minute track of what's blogged. They don't have to search through a site looking for the most current information. It's right in front of them, likely provided by an RSS feed or newsreader. This immediacy helps tie readers to a site as they follow developments in real time. Even more significant than immediacy for attaching readers to blogs are those features of the blog format that contribute to cross-blog connections and conversations. Thus Houbrahan emphasizes the timestamp and the permalink as aspects of the blog format conducive to connectivity. The linking that happens through blogging creates the connections that bind us, she writes. Commentary alone is the province of journals, diaries, and editorial pieces. Trust is more than code and reliability is more than expertise and credentialing. Blogging responds to the problem of finding what one wants by offering something like a relationship, a connection. Section 4. What is a blog, anyway? Dana Boyd criticizes the metaphors on which early answers to the question relied. Not only does she point out the interests technology companies had in defining blogging, interests linked to efforts to build and market their product as well as set standards and expectations for what blogs would be and how they would function, but she also rightly attends to the role of early researchers who treated blogging in terms of genre. The most prominent metaphors in these early attempts to define blogging were journals and journalism. Some researchers followed the lead of hosting services such as LiveJournal in viewing blogs as personal diaries or easily updatable journals. This diary metaphor creates a problem, though. What's appealing about networked personal diaries electronically available for anyone to read? Why would any person whatsoever want to read anyone else's boring journal? And if the journal isn't boring, what sort of exhibitionistic narcissist would inflict it on the entire world? Understood in terms of personal diaries, blogs seem but another aspect of the reality television craze, part of entertainment culture's preoccupation with celebrity. Other researchers agreed with the mainstream media and depicted blogs as new forms of citizen journalism. Whether they treat blogs as vehicles for local and on-the-ground reporting or as sites for the expression of individual opinions, these attempts to define blogs in terms of journalism open up a host of difficulties. The most apparent has been the failure of the vast majority of blogs to live up to the journalistic standards established for them. Bloggers generally lack the ethics and skills associated with professional journalism. Few do new and original reporting but instead remediate the findings of real journalists as they mix into them their own strident, often vicious, points of view. Approached as a genre, then, blogs turn out to be rather pathetic, at least from the perspective of the mainstream media. Together, the two metaphors of journal and journalism configure the practice of blogging in terms of a private and a public sphere, failing to analyze or even acknowledge the inaptness of a modern spatial division as a way of thinking about contemporary media and communicative practices. As of March 2010, Google's blogging service, Blogger, which it purchased from San Francisco-based Pyra Labs in 2002, was still relying on the journals and journalism metaphors. Professional and amateur journalists use blogs to publish breaking news, while personal journalists reveal inner thoughts. Whatever you have to say, Blogger can help you say it. Given the problems that arise when blogs are viewed as a genre, Boyd advocates viewing blogs as a medium, as more like radio or paper than a novel or opera. Blogs serve up content for an audience of anyone, perhaps a few of the blogger's friends, more likely for an uncertain number of strangers. As media, blogs change and evolve. They coexist and interlink with other media, print, video, telephony, etc. To this extent, blogs are part of an open set of communicative practices and technologies. As the spam blogs enact, anything, any gibberish whatsoever, can be content. What is communicated, the content of blogs, is secondary or tertiary to the fact of communication. In Boyd's words, blogs emerge because bloggers are blogging. Blogging is a medium for and practice of communication. Unlike mass media, it doesn't target an imaginary community of everyone, in the nation, state, or city. Unlike one-to-one technologies like the telephone or one-to-a-designated list technologies like email, blogging doesn't presume to reach a designated recipient. Nor does it rely on real-time interactions, live feeds, although various forms of syndication can alert readers when a blog has been updated. Instead, the medium enables the production of content potentially accessible to anyone who happens to find it. Blogging opens possible encounters with the different and unexpected, whether in the form of the blogger's own reflection on what she posts or in the reactions of others. Some of the officiants at blogging's premature funeral agree with Boyd on the centrality of the form. Writing for an electronic magazine based in Australia, Guy Rundle compares blogs to the CB radio fad. Quotation by Rundle. As with CBs, what thrilled people with blogs was the ecstasy of communication, the pure fact of being out there in the wide cyber world, in other words, the form rather than the content. What stales the experience is what some have thought was its greatest attraction, its networked capacity, which makes everyone producer and consumer, and hence collapses the notion of an audience, since time does not expand, while blog numbers do. What most realize is that blogging is the illusion of connection, publishing into a void and thus doubly isolating. End of quotation by Rundle. Rundle's claim for an illusion of collection relies on his illusion of audience and communication. Yes, most of those who expected blogging to lead to fame and fortune, to make them respected pundits or highly paid authors, those who presumed that blogs were type television, would likely have been disappointed. The evidence shows, however, that ever more people are driven to communicate with others who may even be themselves, through blogs. Section 5. The essence of the blog is the post. The post gets the blog off the ground and keeps it going. When posts stop, the blog dies. If the blog owner doesn't delete the entire blog, the posts may have an afterlife available to search engines as viable permalinks on persisting blogs or even archived somewhere along with the rest of the internet. Even if the entire blog is deleted, the fact that posts can be copied, pasted, and repeated, that they can drift and circulate throughout the information networks of communicative capitalism, gives them a kind of haunting permanence. Posts are blogs' immortal remainders, revenants that once released can never be fully contained. The capacity of posts to circulate endlessly means that even dead blogs persist as digital zombies. What's in a post? Anything. Blogging subjectivity isn't narrativized. It's posted. It's not told as a story but presented in moments as an image, reaction, feeling, or event. The post is a form that expresses mediality as such. Blogs, and even more so Twitter, catch oral communication in linear writing. Like a phone call or text message, a post attempts connection. Facebook friends similarly poke each other or leave short remarks on each other's walls. Unlike calls and text messages, though, blog posts are stored, archived, and accessible to virtually anyone. They are immediacy saved, conversations preserved. Posts persist as traces of their originators, whether the originators be individuals, groups, or machines, traces of the addition of something else. The addition may be original, my voice, my image, my remix. I contribute to mark not simply the fact that I am here, that I have a view, but that I am engaging. I am participating in the construction and extension of a manner of being together. If my addition is a tag or link, it contributes to the force or impact of that which is tagged or linked, extending its viability. It's no wonder, then, that blogging services provide so many tools for counting how many lifetime page views, how many last month, how many today, how many this hour, which post generated the most hits, which one accumulated the most links. These counts report what has been added. They count additions, the expansions and extensions that are blogging. The value added, then, stems purely from the being added. Adding creates openings for new links or connections. Perhaps someone will respond. Perhaps the response will generate more posts, more responses, something like a relationship. This possibility infuses additions with feeling, makes them carriers and transmitters of affect. Of course, a response may not be a comment. It may be just a visit, registered as a page view and counted. Even when there is no discernible response, my addition, my post, remains, the opening it introduced ready and present, available as a trace of my past to those who may find it in the future. Instead of judging blog posts as a literary form, it is more useful to consider them as a form of expression in between orality and literacy, or perhaps as a kind of secondary orality, to use Walter Ong's term. While the idea of secondary orality remained relatively unexplored at the time of Ong's death, his characterization of orally based thought includes attributes already key features of mobile, SMS, and online communication. Quotation by Walter Ong. 1. Thoughts are combined and points are made in ways that are additive rather than supportive. Differently put, people string syntactic elements together with and rather than with subordinate clauses. 2. The elements of thoughts and ideas are aggregative rather than analytical. A contemporary example might be the slogans, clichés, and memes that catch on and stand in for ideas and feelings that remain unexplored. 3. Ideas and points are frequently repeated. 4. Traditions are conserved, because little to nothing is written down. Remembering is difficult, hence, not only do points need to be repeated but they need to be attributed to tradition. 5. Ideas are understood in terms of their connection with actual experience, with the life world, rather than abstractly or within a more general analytic field. If I don't know anyone who has been a victim of homophobic violence, then homophobic violence must not be a problem. 6. Knowledge and ideas appear agonistically, polarized, as part of everyday struggle. 7. Ideas are treated in terms of empathy and its lack, that is to say, in an immediate and participatory rather than a distanced fashion. End of quotation by Walter Ong. Section 6. While Boyd is right to criticize reading blogs through the metaphors of journaling and journalism, understanding why these metaphors fail tells us something about blogging as a media practice. Yes, they fail because they focus on the content of blogs rather than the practice of blogging, an increasingly glaring and obvious mistake as ever more paid journalists blog. Blogs are cited in mainstream journalism as evidence from ordinary people. Bloggers appear in print and on television and radio, and internet content is delivered to mobile phones. The content focus can't keep multiply intersecting modes of communication in view. Additionally, rather than following the conventions of either journaling or journalism, blogging occurs in a space that opens up between them, when the news that matters is news of me and my opinion. More important, though, the metaphors of journaling and journalism fail because their focus on the content misses the changes in subjectivity and setting of which blogging is a part. The journaling metaphor takes for granted the personal identity of the subject as diarist, an odd move given the likelihood that the blog is written pseudonymously. As journaling, blogging appears as a technology of the self, a way of documenting, reflecting on, and hence managing oneself. Although this idea has some intuitive appeal, it is belied by the long history of self-writing. The reduction of blogging to journaling overlooks the immense historical variety in practices of writing and their relations to different kinds of selves. Presuming a kind of singularity of the practice of self-writing, moreover, this reduction takes as given the continuity of the self, as if the technologies of the self were somehow not productive, as if a self stood behind the technologies of its own writing. Michel Foucault describes some of the early practices of writing the self. In 1st and 2nd century Rome, writing contributed to an ascetic practice of training the self, of changing the character by positing another before whom one would feel a sense of shame. Here writing is not simply a method for recording one's thoughts or reflecting on one's actions. It is a way of making present one who is not there, of summoning a companion in the imagination in order to feel the pressure of the other's gaze. With the suppositions of another and of shame before this other, 1st and 2nd century Romans, Foucault argues, construe writing as a technique for changing the self, not simply for recording its thoughts or for reflecting on these thoughts. Writing is a training with effects on an individual's character and practice. Foucault mentions the hypomnemeter, individual notebooks that aided memory. These were records of readings, sayings, and thoughts, collections to be used for strength or sustenance when needed. Foucault explains that the hypomnemeter contributed to the formation of the self for three main reasons: the limiting effects of the coupling of reading with writing, the regular practice of the disparate that determines choices, and the appropriation which that practice brings about. Reading was thought to orient the mind toward novelty, to lead one to forget oneself and become scattered and distracted. By writing, one could affirm a set of truths which would constitute not only an object upon which to reflect but a basis for action. Writing the fragments, in other words, enables the writer to subjectivize them, to make them his own, aspects of his specific identity. Another kind of self-writing was correspondence, letter writing. The written letter enabled the author to make himself present to others when he was apart, at a distance. Focusing on Stoic and Epicurean practices, Foucault observes. Quotation by Foucault. To write is thus to show oneself, to project oneself into view, to make one's own face appear in the other's presence. And by this should be understood that the letter is both a gaze that one focuses on the addressee, through the missive he received, he feels looked at, and a way of offering oneself to his gaze by what one tells him about oneself. The reciprocity that correspondence establishes is not simply that of counsel and aid, it is the reciprocity of the gaze and the examination. End of quotation by Foucault. Letters did not need to be about anything in particular. As a technique of the self, they weren't highlighting major events but rather testifying to the quality of a mode of being. Cicero, for example, was quite explicit about his affection for correspondence for its own sake, regardless of whether he had anything to say. Quotation by Cicero. I prefer to write an empty letter than not to write at all. This then is all I have for you, nothing new. Why bother then to write? And when we are together, and chatter away with whatever comes into our heads, surely there is some value in causerie, in which the mere interchange of talk is agreeable, even if there's nothing behind it. End of quotation by Cicero. For Foucault, the ordinariness, the fact that nothing much has happened, is what is noteworthy. Review of the ordinary gave one insight into the kind of life one leads and thus was ideal to a practice of self-examination. We might also emphasize the way that expressing whatever comes into our heads creates an opening to another, an opportunity for connection. What matters, Cicero tells us, is less the content that enables connection than the connection itself. There is some value in causerie, or chat, a value attached to interchange. While attentive to technologies of the self, Foucault is less concerned with technologies of writing. Early written Latin used interpuncts to designate separations between words. As the Romans borrowed more letter forms and vowels from the Greeks, however, they adopted the Greek practice of scriptura continua or uninterrupted writing. That is, their letters were spaced equally apart, regardless of the beginning and ending of words. Scriptura continua made retrieving information after it had been read difficult, to say the least. Unlike the Greeks, moreover, the Romans did not use page numbers, foliation, or catchwords, and only rarely paragraphs, to ease the presentation of textual material. Perhaps because of the suspicion of reading that Foucault notes, Romans did not want to make reading any easier. Thomas N. Habenick makes the point more directly, arguing that the material difficulties associated with reading and writing were convenient means of keeping literature in the hands of the well-to-do elite. For wealthy Romans, writing was generally dictation and reading was generally being read to. The aristocratic writer relied on the hands and skills of another who was actually reading or writing. Well-educated scribes had the difficult task of making sense of written Latin. Reading was slow, painstaking, and likely often done aloud or in a low mumble. Vocalization made it easier to turn letters into language sounds and language sounds into meanings. To be sure, the use of scribes contributed to problems in authentication, problems addressed through the development of distinct personal styles in expression as well as the use of seals. Elite households often employed trained lectors who performed texts for assembled groups. Texts, then, provided opportunities for conversation and discussion. They were more than just the expression of an author. Quotation by William A. Johnson. The odd format of the book role itself intersects with the fact that literary texts were commonly read in the sense of a small group listening to a performance by a reader. The strict, one wants to say obsessive, attention to continuous flow in the design of the ancient book interlocks with the idea that it was the reader's job to bring the text alive, to insert the prosodic features and illocutionary force lacking in the writing system. The continuous role was played by the reader much in the way that we play a videotape or witness a stage performance. End of quotation by William A. Johnson. Even personal letters were often copied, circulated, and read in groups, much like pamphlets or newspapers in later times. Reading in groups was a common practice, a social activity and type of entertainment. If self-writing was a technology of the self, it was a technology deeply interlinked with connection to an audience and community. Reading and writing, for the ancient Romans, had aesthetic elements tied to the pleasures of engagement with others. Section 7. Quotation by Paul Senger. Word separation can be regarded as a product of the frontier civilizations that had developed at the periphery of what had been the Roman Empire. Throughout history, intellectual, technical, and social innovations have often first appeared on the margins of well-established cultures. America and Japan can properly be regarded as frontier civilizations, the former of Europe, the latter of China. Although in the early Middle Ages the impetus for the restructuring of the page had come from the literary achievements of the empire's northern frontier, by the early 10th century the prominence of the insular authors identified with word separation such as Bede, Alcuin, Sir Julius Scotus, Johannes Scotus, and the anonymous compilers of glossaries had waned. A new corpus of scientific knowledge, and with it a new impetus for the adoption of word separation, sprang forth in another linguistic frontier zone, that of Mozarabic Spain. End of quotation by Paul Senger. A product of globalization, blogging similarly emerges at the intersections of differing languages, cultures, and discourses, as the subsumption or folding into one another of their edges and frontiers. The imagistic properties of texts that enable words to be seen as distinct units of meaning, as direct correspondence to objects and acts in the world, continue to intensify in this millennium as they did in the previous two. Can one easily glean or absorb or be impressed by a written word, be impressed so quickly that one hasn't quite read it? Can one quickly identify a link? Quickly ascertain the presence or absence of something new? Can one immediately discern the structure of the visual field so that one knows what not to read, where to put one's time or effort? Color, space, images, all these establish the visual fields of blogs. Section 8. Foucault's technologies of the self rely on the installation of a gaze, of the perspective of another before whom the subject imagines itself. In a first instance, the installation of this gaze can be thought of as the substitution of a symbolic position in the place of the audience of others customary in classical textual performances. For the subject this gaze constitutes another who registers my acts in the symbolic network. It provides the subject with an ego ideal, a point of symbolic identification. Zizek argues that this gaze is a crucial supposition for the subject's capacity to act. The gaze qua ego ideal is the point from which one sees one's actions as valuable and worthwhile, as making sense. Absent that gaze, one may feel trapped, passive, or unsure as to the point of doing anything at all. To this extent, identifying with the gaze enables the subject's activity. The gaze structures our relation to our practices. For example, instead of experiencing the state as myriad forms and organizations, branches and edicts, presences and regulations, in our daily activities we tend to posit the state as a kind of entity, another aware of what we are doing. Similarly, we may posit an enemy assessing our every action. The point is that through symbolic identification the subject posits the very entity it understands itself as responding to. How it imagines this other will be crucial to the kinds of activities the subject can undertake. Weirdly, then, the active subject has to posit a kind of passivity, that is, a passive other before whom the subject appears. The subject has to imagine himself, in other words, as fascinating the other, as doing something or saying something or even watching something that captivates the other. As Zizek emphasizes, the gaze is thus reflexive, doubled insofar as the subject sees itself being seen. The one who is captivated, in other words, is the subject. Although the subject needs to posit a gaze in order to understand its acts as mattering, registering, there is something disturbing about the gaze, something foreign and excessive, unchosen and unwanted. Zizek writes that in the case of the gaze, the point to which the subject makes himself seen retains its dramatic heterogeneity and non-transparency. It remains an object in a strict Lacanian sense, not a symbolic feature. In a setting of multiply interlinked media, we are never quite certain to what we have made ourselves visible. We don't know who is looking at us or how they are looking. We can't even be sure whether there is a single or multiple perspectives. What databases are we in? Who is Google does and why? This disturbing uncertainty points to a second, more traumatic, version of the gaze not as the big other of the ego ideal but as what Lacan refers to as the small other, objet petit a. In this version, the gaze refers to our own entrapment in the field of the visible. I see only from one point, but in my existence I am looked at from all sides. What one sees is always incomplete, in need of being filled in. Yet this filling in necessarily brings with it inadequacies and distortions. The subject might fill in what he wants to see, his desire may fill in the gaps he encounters. He may then become aware of such a gap and his involvement in it, feeling himself somehow seen, even vulnerable. Each side of this relation to the gap, to a lure or stain in the visible field, the side of seeing it and of being seen seeing it, is an aspect of the gaze. Joan Kopiek's reading of Freud is one of the best accounts of the gaze. Quotation by Joan Kopiek. Freud's argument distinguishes the act of looking at oneself through the intermediary of an alien object from the act of looking at oneself through an alien person. The first concerns that reflexive circuit by which one apprehends oneself in the categories of the culture to which one belongs or of someone one wishes to please, with the result that one thereby regards oneself as a known or knowable object. The second concerns a completely different kind of circuit, that of the active-passive drive, which turns around on itself. In this case, because I do not expose myself to the look of a determinate other, I do not receive a message back regarding my determinate identity. The reflexive circuit of scopic drive does not produce a knowable object, it produces a transgression of the pleasure principle, by forcing a hole in it. The scopic drive produces an exorbitant pleasure that disrupts the ego identity formed by the first circuit. End of quotation by Joan Kopiek. I once thought I saw the postman sitting in his delivery truck cuddling a puppy. This seemed odd. A second glance revealed that he was sorting letters and that there was no puppy. I immediately felt embarrassed, even rather ashamed. It was almost as if there were a gaze in the postman missing, puppy complex that saw me see myself making this bizarre mistake. It felt like I was caught not just making the mistake but realizing the mistake. In Lacan's words, generally speaking, the relation between the gaze and what one wishes to see involves a lure. The subject is not presented as other than he is, and what one shows him is not what he wishes to see. Gaze, then, refers not to a specific person whom one imagines being seen by but rather to a more unsettling feeling of an excess disturbing one's seeing, both in terms of what one sees and in one's being seen. Some bloggers find themselves disoriented by the experience that people they know read their blogs. We presumed we were posting for strangers and ended up more exposed than we expected. Our families, friends, colleagues, or employers were lurking on our blogs, learning about our passions and idiosyncrasies. The audiences before whom we perform our identities, child, expert, collector, lover, converged, undermining the separations and distinctions that told us who we were, rendering us nothing in particular, but still something. Blogging is a technology uncoupled from the illusion of a core, true, essential, and singular self. The subjects of blogs are fragmented, appearing as neither true nor false, just appearing as whatever they happen to post. More formally put, in communicative capitalism, the gaze to which one makes oneself visible is appointed in an opaque and heterogeneous network. It is not the gaze of the symbolic other of our ego ideal but the more disturbing, traumatic gaze of a gap or excess, objet petit a. Our disclosures are surveilled, archived, remembered, in ways that exceed our ability to manage or control. On the one hand, this is the source of their immense attraction, what lures us in, what incites us to practices of revelation and display. On the other, the media that incite us to create and express, to offer our thoughts, feelings, and opinions freely, to participate, but in what? Deliver us up to others to use for purposes of their own. Because one is never sure how one is seen, one is never certain of one's place in the symbolic order. How, exactly, are we being looked at? One never really knows who one is despite all the cameras, files, media, and databases. A celebrity gamer in one place is elsewhere just another kid. A famous jazz musician may have zero name recognition among economists. Someone with 1 million friends on MySpace may be no one at all to the rest of us. Facebook tries to help us out with this by supplying endless quizzes that promise to tell us who we really are, Which Lord of the Rings character, which famous philosopher, which ferocious animal? Who one is in the socio-symbolic order is uncertain, and ever-changing. The order is never fixed, it is in constant flux. Zizek tags this flux and uncertainty as a decline in symbolic efficiency. In the terms of Lacanian theory, the decline of symbolic efficiency is accompanied by a convergence between the imaginary and the real. Imaginary identities sustained by the promise and provision of enjoyment replace symbolic identities. The global information and financial networks of communicative capitalism offer new ways for us to imagine ourselves, immense varieties of lifestyles with which we can experiment. Each can and must be creative, different, unique. Each must develop a distinctive personal style. These unique identities, though, are extremely vulnerable. The frames of reference that give them meaning and value are constantly shifting. Challenges to these identities can appear at any moment. Others' successes, achievements, and capacities to enjoy too easily call our own into question. So while it may seem that the decline of symbolic efficiency ushers in a new era of freedom from rigid norms and expectations, the fluidity and adaptability of imaginary identities are accompanied by fragility and insecurity. Imaginary identities are incapable of establishing a firm place to stand, a position from which one can make sense of one's experiences, one's worlds. Blogs mark and mediate these identities, whatever they might be. Social network sites respond to the decline of symbolic efficiency. Anxious before the gaze, before the disturbing inquiries and intrusions of unknown others, unsure about what to expect, about whether one is succeeding or failing, whether others are friends or foes, we build more reliable, apparently intimate networks. We may not know everyone in our intimate network, but we know they are friends. We had to friend them. Someone has vouched for them. We share a connection or have a connection produced for us by virtue of the games and gifts available on the site. With fewer strangers, these networks are less stressful than the open uncertainties disrupting our attempts to sense who we are or might be. There are people we can trust, people who share with us little moments of their day, assuring us that there might still be some reality that we have in common. Presenting our lives and activities to our network, we attempt to install in ourselves a capacity for action. Maybe that's why cyberbullying emerged with such force in 2007. It's not that there weren't bullies before MySpace and Facebook. Bloggers have always complained about trolls. It's that people continued to believe in and search for connection. Section 9. To emphasize the decline of symbolic efficiency is to emphasize a retreat from or effacement of the law of desire and an amplification of the logic of drive. The primary setting for our activity as communicating subjects is not law and its transgression but drive's repetitive circuit. Zizek explains the difference between desire and drive via a change in the position and function of objet petit. Quotation by Zizek. Although, in both cases, the link between object and loss is crucial, in the case of the objet A as the object of desire, we have an object which was originally lost, which coincides with its own loss, which emerges as lost, while, in the case of the objet A as the object of drive, the object is directly the loss itself. In the shift from desire to drive, we pass from the lost object to loss itself as an object. That is to say, the weird movement called drive is not driven by the impossible quest for the lost object, it is a push to directly enact the loss, the gap, cut, distance, itself. End of quotation by Zizek. Drive is a kind of compulsion or force. It's a force that is shaped, that takes its form and pulsion, from loss. Drive is loss as a force or the force loss exerts on the field of desire. The compulsive movement of drive shapes networked media as they enact the loss of symbolic efficiency. This enactment is not an effort to restore the symbolic. Rather, it's the extraordinarily plastic movement of the drives, to borrow Freud's expression. Freud continues, they may appear in each other's places. One of them may accumulate the intensity of the other. That the drive is thwarted or sublimated means that it reaches its goal by other means, through other objects. Blocked in one direction, it splits into multiple vectors, into a network. If Freud views the process as akin to the flow of water into multiple tributaries and canals, we might also think of it as an acephalic power's attempt to constitute and reach its objects by any means necessary, and then to do it again and again and again and again, getting a little enjoyment in each repetition. Lacan emphasizes that the drives are partial drives. He specifies this idea as partial with regard to the biological finality of sexuality. I understand the point to refer to the variety of changing, incomplete, and dispersed ways subjects enjoy. Drives do not develop in a linear fashion from infant to adult. They fragment and disperse as they satisfy themselves via a variety of objects. As Kopiak writes, it is as if the very function of the drive were this continuous opening up of small fractures between things. Her language here is precise. The fractures are not of things but between them. The parts that are objects of the drives are not parts of wholes but parts that appear in the force of loss as new expressions of a whole. She uses Gilles Deleuze's example of the role of the close-up as a cinematic device. It's not part of a scene enlarged, rather, it's an expression of the whole of the scene. Lacan refers to the partial object as an object of lack, an object that emerges in the void of the drive to provide the subject with satisfaction. Correlative to the part is a further aspect of drive that Lacan renders as montage, a constant jumping without transition between heterogeneous elements. Montage suggests movement without message, movement with intensity, movement outward and back. Disparate images and sounds shift and mutate without beginning or end, head or tail. Lacan, I think the resulting image would show the working of a dynamo connected up to a gas tap. A peacock's feather emerges, and tickles the belly of a pretty woman, who is just lying there looking beautiful. More contemporary ways to understand montage are mashups, samples, and remixes, or, better, our very movement through contemporary communication and entertainment networks. I enter. I click. I like. I poke. Drive circulates, round and round, producing satisfaction even as it misses its aim, even as it emerges in the plastic network of the decline of symbolic efficiency. Section 10. In the Ethics of Psychoanalysis, Lacan positions drive between the two deaths, symbolic death and the death of the organism. Blogging after the death of the blogs persists in an analogous domain of the drive. Caught in the circuits of communicative capitalism out of which it emerged, it persists, whether in the form of fully automated splogs, the remnants of past posts excavated and ranked by Google, or our compulsions to make ourselves seen.